Hello class, in this tutorial I'm going to introduce you to Unwrap UVW. This is going to be your first lab working with UV coordinates. This is being recorded in 3ds Max 2023. On Discord, I'm going to provide you with a two-dimensional image file. It's called FancyBoxD. I'm going to come over here to my Max 2023 folder, my scenes, and make a folder called FancyBox. You can see I already have one here that I made for myself. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to drag that texture, that two-dimensional image file, and drag it in there. I don't need my downloads anymore. I'm just going to click here and I'm going to copy this path. And then here in Max, I'm going to do File, Reset. Do I really want to reset? Yes, I do. I'm going to do File, Save As. I'm going to paste that path there. So just right click, paste, and hit enter. And then I'm just going to give it a name, right? And the name will be my initials underscore FancyBox. Okay, so I'm in a Max scene. I have it there. Let's open up our material editor. I'm just going to hit M on my keyboard. That'll open it up. Now previously, the first thing I had you do is go into rendering, render setup, and set your renderer to the scanline renderer. Right? You want to make sure that is set. If not, do so now. All right, when you do, that means that you are going to have materials, general, which I'm going to collapse, and then standard. I'm just going to drag over a standard legacy. And if I go back to that folder where that image file is, I can say view large icons. You can see the 3ds Max file and the image. If I drag the image in, the image now shows up here inside the material editor. All right, so I brought in this external image file. So in order to get this image to show up in an object, you need a material. So I'm going to add this image to this material by clicking and dragging and plugging it into the diffuse color. And if I double click here, you'll see the icon get bigger, and now there's this material sphere inside here, which I think if I thought there was a shortcut key that let me orbit around in there. There is one, I just don't remember what it is, but it's a sphere, and now you see that that image is applied to it. All right, so now I have a material. Let's get an object to put it on. So I'm going to click here in, move this over. I'm going to click in perspective to make that active, and I'm going to click on box over here and create. Let's open up keyboard entry, and I'm going to leave the X, Y, and Z at 0. I'm going to give it a length of 100. I'm going to hit tab on my keyboard, give it a width of 100, and hit tab again. And for height, I'm going to give it a value of 100. That means we made a 1 meter box once we hit create. I'm going to scroll with my middle mouse. Actually, I'm just going to hit Z, and that will center that. Let's right click to get out of box creation mode. I'm going to come in here, and in the top left corner where the little plus is, I'm going to hit maximize viewport. Hold the middle mouse wheel to kind of move this over and kind of zoom out with the middle mouse. Let's right click on our material here in the material editor and say assign material to selection. Now that's assign material to selection. So if you at any point did not select, if you clicked off of your box and it was no longer selected, you won't be able to do that. It'll be grayed out because you do not have a selection. Okay. Let's come up here and turn on edged faces so we can see the edges of our object. All right, so we have this image. If I double click on it here, I can click view image. That'll show me what the image looks like. So this isn't anything anyone would ever really use as a texture map for games because it has a lot of dead space. What you're seeing is the pixels at the very edge of the model or the edge of the texture are being repeated out. This is something that gets happen when for certain texture creation software. It happens so that if this texture is ever reduced in size for performance, it'll still have the proper colors. It won't just suddenly, you won't get bleed from there being some weird background color coming in. That's why this looks like this, because I built this in other software and generated these. But you have numbers 1 through 6, because there's 6 sides on a cube, and you have this little vine going around. And we want the top of the box to be number 1, and then we want these numbers to continue all the way around with the vine wrapping around with the 6 eventually in the bottom. So let's talk about how we do that. I'm going to close this. I'm going to right click on my box and say convert to editable poly. Now see, we've moved over here to the modify panel. Let's close our material editor. Just clicking on the close. So again, week 1, day 1, I had you go ahead and set up your modifier sets. If you haven't done that, you can go back and you could do that now or you could do it later. I have all these buttons, which I'm going to start using a lot. Buttons like Unwrap UVW. I'm going to go ahead and click remove. And I'm also going to show you that if I click here in the modifier sets, I could scroll down and it's right here. Because all this list of these modifier sets that are listed right here, these are modifiers that I use a lot when I am working. And so these are the ones that I always have available to me because these are the ones that are always coming up. All right, so now I have Unwrap UVW on. If I hit the little arrow next to it to expand it, you can see I have vertex, I have edge, and I have polygon. Now, when you create a object, like if I go here to box, you will notice that it has by default generate mapping coordinates is turned on. And so this box already has some basic UV coordinates on it. As discussed in the lecture, we have X, Y, and Z, which is world coordinates, and then U, V, and W, which is our two-dimensional image coordinates. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to go to polygon, and I want to find the rollout for edit UVs and click on open the UV editor. Now right away you'll notice as you move around everything gets highlighted yellow, right? I find that really distracting. It's like a pre-selection thing. I like to go into options, preferences, and turn off selection preview. First thing we want to do is we want to see that image that's on here. So I'm going to click where it says check pattern checker. I'm going to come down, you see our image is listed. If I click, it should show up there. It's very, very useful if you assign the material and then put on the Unwrap UVW. If you do it in that order, then it will show up. Sometimes it doesn't show up. If it doesn't, you will come down here and do pick texture and then navigate and find where it's located, which will probably happen in one of the many tutorials we're going to be doing related to Unwrap UVW. All right, so as I come in here, if I just click in this space, something gets selected, but what is it? Right? You can see there's a little X, Y, and Z. If I hit F3 to go to wireframe, you see, okay, there's a polygon there. Let's click on orbit, orbit around, hit F3. So effectively what happens is the generate UV coordinates is just a default setting. It just gives you a very basic set of UVs. Every one of these surfaces is mapped to what we call 0 to 1. See these two lines? You have X, which goes across, V, which goes up and down. I like to remember V by just thinking vertical. That's not what it means. All right? There's no hidden meaning here for U and V in the UV coordinates. It's not named after Augustus or Uther von something, I don't know, von weirdo, whatever it may be, right? There's no hidden meaning for UVW. You have X, Y, and Z, which are world coordinates, and then the next letters are U, V, and W. It's not V and W, it's U, V, and then W, because W is used for world space, because there is a way to project coordinates based off of location in the world. So we have these basic UVs set here. And where these two coordinates, V and U, meet at this little point, that is 0. And then much like out here in the world, we have different locations, right? This is 100, 200, 300. The same thing happens in UV space. And we know where that is because we have 0 here and then 1 here. Because a lot of UV mapping, it is image-based, projected on it. There's a lot of cases where you're going to have, like I said, explicit mapping, which is a custom UV set, like we're dealing with here. Everything's going to happen inside a 0 to 1 custom space, right? Doesn't always, right? There's lots of cases where it doesn't, but this is a good way to give you a sense and an anchor. This is your basic coordinate system you're working in. So let's do mapping, flatten mapping, and say okay. Now that's only there if you're in polygons, just make sure you're in polygon mode. All right, so what that does is it just takes everything and just projects it out, right? It projects everything based off the direction, the normal, and that the normal is the facing side of the UV, or of the polygon. Let's take all these. I'm going to go to scale. I'm just going to shrink them down. I want right click, go to move. I'm going to scale them so that they're roughly about the size of those boxes. So it's one less thing to deal with later. All right, that's kind of good enough. I'll just move them out of the way. Because what I want to do, my goal here is just to click on the top one, find out which of these polygons it is, and then move it. Now I'm going to click and go into freeform. Freeform's by usually the default tool that it's on. And you can always, go down to orbit around to see it better. F2 will toggle the shading in here if that ever gets in your way. F2. So let's click on this box. And now I just want to make it so that this little vine wraps around. And so I'm just going to keep going through and grabbing these pieces. So it's pretty simple, just orbiting around, gets us used to working in 3D space. The shading is definitely a hassle. We can orbit around, see 3, 4. See how I'm just kind of blasting through this, just sort of copying these things into place. And now we'll orbit around to the bottom. Select this last one, bring it over, and I'm just going to make it fit. Now, we do want the vine to look like it's wrapping around. It's not there. There are quick transforms where if I click and then I click in space, it'll rotate. You have to click in 3D space after clicking on it though, which is tiresome. There is just a regular rotate tool if you want, which is very interactive. That's really it. You just go through and arrange these. Now, we can take this a step further. If I go to vertex, I can do things like region select this entire row here. And I can use my quick transform tools where if I click here, this is a line horizontal. And that'll line those all up in a nice clean line. And then if I come over to the side, and I did that as 2 separate moves. This row first, the second row everts, and then the third row everts. I'm going to grab these far right, and I'm going to align vertical. Oops. And I'll just do that to kind of line up all these different rows. All right, very quick and easy way to kind of line things up. And then we can go one step further. Everywhere there's this green line, it means that those UVs are not welded together, right? And in some cases, we can actually weld them together, which sometimes helps with performance. People don't talk about that as much. It used to be a bigger deal in the bygone days. So I'm just going to region select all the vertices. I'm going to find this rollout called Explode. There's a button here called Target Weld. If I click on that, you see those green lines change to white. That means that these points are now welded in UV space, in this 2-dimensional space. If I orbit them around, you can see it. Right? If I take this and just move it, you'll see I'm totally distorting it. Right? It's going to do its best to try and fit that on there, right? Which is just what I'm going to do that. All right. So now we have our nice box, right? I'm going to orbit around so I can see the bottom. If I right, hang on. So ideally, I'd want you to take a snip of this, kind of showing me this bottom in your UV layout. So snipping tool, say new, right? And then I could just save this and turn this in. All right, now, when you're done, when you get UVs that you're happy with, even if they're UVs that aren't quite finished, just right click and say convert to edit poly. That makes the UV work that you've done permanent. Those UVs are now baked in there. You could always put on a brand new Unwrap UVW and adjust them, right? You see the checker is gone. It's like, oh no, it's not gone. It's just you need to click here and click on Fancy Box again in order to be able to see it, right? If it gets to a point where you're like, oh, okay, you know what? I don't like where that seam is. I want to just grab it. So I'm in vertex, I region selected. I can even click here and hold and get just a, so I can move it over a little bit, right? So I could move that if I want, kind of adjust it. That's only if you kind of want to do that for whatever reason. So let's just convert that to poly. And that's really it. You know, that's your first exposure to working with UV coordinates.